Before I go ahead and start this set of stories, I'm not sure if I'll be able to upload for the next couple of days, so I just want to say a Happy New Year's to everybody out there. If you do like these stories, please leave a thumbs up, subscribe, leave a comment down below. You know I always read them. I should have known better than to stealth camp in an abandoned Ames parking lot. The crumbling department store had been empty since '02, its faded red letters barely visible against the sun-bleached facade. But I was tired, my van needed repairs, and the empty expanse of cracked asphalt seems peaceful enough at sunset. Now, for those who don't know, stealth camping is somewhat of an art form, a way of living free in plain sight. We're the modern nomads, sleeping in converted vans and cars, finding refuge in the forgotten spaces of America. There's something thrilling about it, something that speaks to our primitive instincts. Every night is a new challenge, a new spot to claim temporarily as your own. Most of us stick to Walmart lots or Bureau of Land Management territory, but some, like me, seek out the strange places, the dead malls, the abandoned big box stores, the retail graveyards. I'd done this before, parked overnight in a defunct retail space across America. Each spot tells a different story. The Circuit City where I woke up to coyotes singing, the Toys R Us where a homeless man taught me to make the perfect cup of instant coffee. These places hold secrets, memories of America's retail golden age. Usually the only thing you have to worry about are security guards or local cops. Usually. The first weird thing I noticed was how the parking lot lines seemed wrong. In the dying light, they didn't run parallel like they should. Instead, they curved slightly, creating patterns that made my eyes hurt if I stared for too long. I chalked it up to fatigue in the way shadows played across the broken pavement. Around midnight, though, the tapping started. At first, I thought it was rain, just a light drizzle hitting the van's roof. But when I peeked through my blackout curtains, the sky was clear. The sound continuing, though. Tapping like fingernails on glass, moving from window to window. Then came the cart sounds. Now, anyone who's spent time in parking lots knows that sound, the rattle and squeak of shopping cart wheels on asphalt. But Ames had been closed for 20 years. There shouldn't have been any carts left. I lay still in my sleeping bag, listening to the slow scrape of metal on pavement, circling my van. Once, twice, 3 times. The sound grew closer with each pass. My phone was dead. It had been at 98% when I parked, but now it wouldn't turn on. Through my side window, I could see the store's entrance, and something seemed different. The automatic doors that had been boarded up earlier were now open, darkness spilling out like ink. And that's when I first saw them. The figures pushing carts in the moonlight. Their movements were wrong, jerky, mechanical. They wore faded red vests with the Ames logo, name tags that caught the moonlight in impossible ways. And the tags showed names like Margaret, since 1975, and David, customer service lead. But the faces above them. God, the faces. You see, where features should have been, there was just smooth, pale flesh like mannequin heads wrapped in human skin. But they weren't still like mannequins. The skin rippled and shifted as if something underneath was trying to push through. One turned toward me, and though it had no eyes, I knew it saw me. Its head tilted at an angle no human neck could manage, and its mouth began to form, splitting the blank flesh like a tear in fabric. The uniforms they wore were pristine, as if they had been pressed that morning, but they were definitely from another era. The cut and style screaming late 90s retail. Price tags hung from their sleeves, yellow with age but still showing impossible numbers. $12.99, employee uniform, final sale. Their hands, when they gripped the shopping carts, were too long, too pale, fingers extending and retracting like pale spider legs. I started my van. My hands are shaking so badly I dropped the keys twice. The engine coughed to life, and I floored it, not caring about the cart that crashed into my bumper. In my rearview mirror, I watched the figures stand motionless, their carts abandoned, all facing my direction. One raised an arm in farewell, the limb extending far longer than any human arm should, waving with too many joints. And the last thing I remember before turning onto the highway was the store sign flickering to life for a split second, even though the power had been cut decades ago. Below the main sign, the reader board displayed a message. "Welcome back, shopper. Your shift never ended." Now, I drive past that lot sometimes in daylight. The parking lines are normal now, running straight and true. But I notice something new each time. More cars in the lot, despite the store being closed. Most are old models, their paint faded, license plates from states that stopped issuing those designs decades ago. And sometimes, if I look quickly enough, I'll catch glimpses of people pushing carts through the empty spaces, their faces turned away, always turned away. Their name tags glint in the sunlight, adding new names, new years of service. The thing about stealth camping is that we're all looking for something. Freedom, adventure, escape from the 9-to-5 grind. We chase that thrill of finding the perfect spot, that rush of waking up somewhere new, that sense of beating the system. But sometimes, in those abandoned places, in those forgotten corners of America, something is looking for us too. I don't stealth camp anymore since the Ames trip, and I never shop at department stores. I've learned that some spaces should stay abandoned, some doors should stay closed, and some shifts never end. Now, last week I got a letter in the mail, no return address, just an Ames employee application form yellowed with age. At the top, someone had written in red ink, "Your interview is scheduled for midnight. Uniform provided." I burned it, but sometimes, late at night, I could hear the cartwheels on pavement, and I wonder if they're still waiting for me to start my shift. Now, I thought that would be the end of it, but I was so very wrong. You see, those letters kept coming. Employee evaluations from 1983, scheduled changes for shifts in 1995, a holiday party invitation from 1978. Each one more yellowed than the last, each one addressed to me, though I hadn't even been born when some were dated. They smelled of dust and that distinct department store scent, a mixture of new clothes, shoe leather, and fluorescent lights. I started researching Ames after that night, though. Not just the surface stuff about their bankruptcy in 2002, but the deeper stories, the ones that didn't make the newspapers. I found others like me in online forums dedicated to retail history and urban exploration. Most posts were what you would expect. Photos of abandoned stores, memories of childhood shopping trips. But buried in thread after thread, I found stories that made my blood run cold. A night security guard in Connecticut who reported seeing employees working the sales floor at 3 a.m., 6 months after the store closed. When he checked the security cameras, he saw only static, but in that static he swore he could make out name tags floating in the darkness. A demolition worker in Pennsylvania who found a break room behind a false wall, with a half-filled coffee pot still warm and a time clock showing the current date, though the power had been off for years. The time cards in the rack all had the same punch-in number, midnight. None had punch-out times. A former manager in Maine who confessed that in the final days before closure, employees would sometimes walk into the stockroom and never come out. When he checked the schedules, those employees had always been listed as on duty for shifts that stretched back decades before they were born. And the more I dug, the more I realized that Ames wasn't just another failed retail chain. There was something else going on, something that had been building long before the bankruptcy, something that didn't end when the stores closed. 3 weeks after my night in the parking lot, I met Sandra. She responded to one of my posts on a retail history forum, asking to meet me in person. Now, she'd been an Ames employee in 1992, she said, had some things she couldn't discuss online. We met at a diner just off I-80, the kind of place where the coffee is always burnt and the waitress calls you hun. Sandra was in her 60s with carefully styled gray hair and hands that shook slightly as she stirred her coffee. She bought a shoebox full of old documents. Now, I worked at store number 4237, she said, pulling out an old employee handbook. I was the assistant manager in housewares. I started in '89 and I stayed till the end, or what we thought was the end. She paused, glancing around the diner. Did you know that Ames had a special employee retention program? I shook my head. Well, they call it the Forever Forward program. They mentioned it in orientation, but only briefly. Said it was a way to ensure lifelong employment. Well, most of us just thought it was corporate talk, but then people started signing up for it. She pushed a document across the table. It looked like a standard employment contract, but the fine print made my eyes blur when I tried to read it. The first thing we noticed was how those employees never seemed to age. Mary in lingerie, well, she signed up in '82, and 10 years later, wouldn't you know it, she looked exactly the same. And when I mentioned it, she just smiled and said that the employee benefits were better than any skincare routine. Sandra's hands were shaking harder now. Then there were the schedules. Forever Forward employees would be listed for shifts that didn't make sense. Midnight to midnight? Days that didn't happen yet? Years that had already passed, but they always showed up, always perfectly dressed in pressed uniforms. But the worst part was the name tags, she continued. Every month they'd show a longer employment history. Mary since 1982 became Mary since 1972. And then Mary since 1962. But Ames hadn't even existed in 1962. She pulled out another document, a store layout map that made my head hurt to look at. The dimensions were wrong, spaces overlapping in ways that shouldn't be possible. Well, the stores, they were bigger on the inside, not in a way you'd noticed at first, but the stockroom. Sometimes you'd walk for hours trying to find the exit. Sometimes you'd find departments that aren't on the map, staffed by employees you'd never seen before, wearing uniforms from different decades. I told her about my night in the parking lot, about the figures with their blank faces and impossible limbs, and she nodded as if she'd expected this. They're still working their shifts, she whispered. All of them. Every employee who has ever signed that contract, the stores didn't really close, you see. They just shifted, moved sideways into somewhere else. But they still need new employees, always hiring, always expanding. She reached into her purse and pulled out a name tag. It was blank, but as I watched, letters began to form on its surface. My name, followed by, since 1975, the year Ames had opened its first store. "They've chosen you," she said. "That's why they keep sending the letters. Once they notice you, they don't stop until you accept the position, or until..." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. I pushed the name tag back across the table, but Sandra was already standing up, gathering her documents. "I shouldn't have come," she said, "but I had to warn somebody. Had to try to explain. It's just, if you see any more help wanted signs and empty Ames windows, don't you look too long. And whatever you do, don't you fill out any applications." She left money for her coffee and hurried out. Through the diner window, I watched her get into her car, an immaculately maintained '92 Oldsmobile with an Ames employee parking permit still visible on the dashboard. As she pulled away, I could have sworn her face looked smoother, younger, her hair darkening from gray to brown. Now that night, laying in my van, parked in a well-lit truck stop far from any abandoned retail, I went through the photos on my phone from that night at Ames. Most were too dark to make out anything, but one caught my attention. In it, reflected in my van's side mirror, was a figure I hadn't noticed before. It was Sandra, wearing a pristine Ames uniform, her name tag gleaming, Sandra, since 1892. Ames didn't exist in 1892. The next morning I tried to find the diner where we'd met, but it wasn't there. Instead, I found an empty lot with faded parking lines that curved in strange patterns, and in the center was a single shopping cart, new and shining, with the job application clipped to its handle. The retail apocalypse, they call it. The death of brick-and-mortar stores in the age of Amazon. But what if those stores aren't really dying? What if they're just changing, becoming something else, something that exists in spaces between open and closed, between now hiring and going out of business? You know, I see them more often now, the forever forward employees. They're in every dead mall, every empty store window. Their name tags show impossible years, their uniforms pristine no matter the decade. They're waiting, watching, ready to help the next customer, the next employee, the next wanderer who parks in their lot thinking they've found a safe place to sleep. Now, last night I dreamed I was walking through an Ames store that never ended. The aisles stretched into infinity, the fluorescent lights buzzing with a sound that might have been words. Every employee I passed had my face, blank and smooth at first, but slowly developing features, slowly becoming more real. When I woke up, my van was in that parking lot again, though I know I'd fallen asleep hundreds of miles away. On the passenger seat was a uniform in my size, price tag still attached. $12.99. Employee uniform, final sale. The name tag was blank and waiting. The automatic doors are open now, spilling light instead of darkness. And inside I could see figures arranging displays, straightening merchandise ready for another day of business. Their movements are more natural now, almost human. Almost. One turns and waves to me, arm bending normally, face fully formed. It's Sandra, but young again, wearing the same uniform she had in 1992. Behind her, I see Mary from lingerie, David from customer service, and all the others from her stories. They're smiling, beckoning. Your shift is about to start, they seem to say. We've been waiting for so long. The thing about stealth camping is that it teaches you to recognize safe spaces, to know when a place feels wrong, but it also teaches you something else. Sometimes the wrong places are the only ones left. Sometimes the only way forward is just to go right through. I'm writing this from the Ames break room. Coffee's fresh, though the pot looks like it's from 1975. My uniform fits perfectly. The time clock shows midnight, though my phone, now working again, says noon. My name tag is still blank, but I could see letters starting to form. I don't know what year it will show. I don't know if I'll be able to leave once it does. But I understand now why they do it, why they sign up for the Forever Forward program. In a world where everything is temporary, where stores close and jobs disappear and nothing lasts, there's something appealing about a position that is truly permanent, about a shift that never ends. So, if you're ever driving late at night and you see an Ames store lit up like it's 1995, keep driving. If you're tempted to park in that empty lot, thinking it's safe for the night, keep going. And if you get a job application in the mail, burn it before the ink has a chance to spell your name. But if you've already parked there, if you've already seen what I've seen, if you're reading this and recognizing your own story, well, there's always room for more employees. The store is always expanding. The shift is always starting. And the name tags, they're always blank at first. Welcome to Ames. Your shift begins at midnight, and it never, ever ends. The last campsite. I used to think the worst thing about stealth camping was getting caught, but now I know better. Sometimes not getting caught is worse. I've been doing this for years, finding those hidden spots where no one goes, setting up my tent after dark, and disappearing before dawn. It was my way of seeing the country without burning through my savings at overpriced campgrounds. Plus, there was something thrilling about it, like being a ghost in the wilderness, leaving no trace except perhaps a slightly flattened patch of grass. That Friday in October started like any other stealth camping trip. I'd identified a promising spot using satellite imagery, a small clearing about 2 miles off the Appalachian Trail in western Virginia, far enough from the main path that even serious hikers wouldn't stumble across it. The topographical maps showed it was nestled in a slight depression, which meant any campfire wouldn't be visible from a distance. It was perfect. I parked my beat-up Subaru at a rarely used trailhead just as the sun was setting. The autumn air had that crisp edge to it, carrying the sweet, rotten smell of fallen leaves. My pack was light, just the essentials for a 2-night stay. Tent, sleeping bag, water filter, some freeze-dried meals, and my usual security measures, which is a can of bear spray and my father's old buck knife. I'd learned long ago that the real dangers in the wilderness usually walk on 2 legs, not 4. The hike in was harder than the maps had suggested. The terrain was steep, and the fallen leaves made the ground treacherous. My headlamp carved a narrow tunnel of light through the darkness, and more than once I had to double-check my GPS to make sure I was still on track. The trees seemed to grow denser the further I went, their branches interweaving overhead until barely any moonlight filtered through. Something felt off from the start, but I couldn't put my finger on what. Maybe it was the silent October woods that should be alive with sounds. Owls, small creatures rustling in the undergrowth, the wind in the trees. But there was nothing, just the crunch of my boots and my own breathing, which seemed unnaturally loud in the still air. I reached the clearing around 9 p.m. It was smaller than the satellite images had suggested, maybe 30 feet across, roughly circular. The ground was unusually flat, almost artificially so, covered in a thick carpet of fallen leaves. Perfect for camping, I thought, though something in the back of my mind whispered that it was too perfect. Setting up camp in the dark was second nature by now. I had my ultralight one-person tent pitched in under 10 minutes. My sleeping bag rolled out inside. I didn't bother with a fire. The temperature wasn't supposed to drop below 50 anyway, and flames would only draw attention. Instead, I settled for a cold dinner of trail mix and beef jerky, washing it down with water I'd packed in. But that's when I noticed the first really strange thing. The clearing was absolutely round. Not roughly circular like I'd first thought, but perfectly round, as if someone had used a giant compass to draw it. The trees at the edge grew in an unnaturally even spacing, their trunks forming a kind of fence around the perimeter. Told myself, I'm just imagining things. Because when you're alone in the woods at night, your mind plays tricks on you. It finds patterns that aren't there. But still, I double-checked that my bear spray was within arm's reach before climbing into my sleeping bag. But sleep didn't come easily. The silence was oppressive, seeming to press against my eardrums like a physical object. Usually I find the isolation of stealth camping peaceful, but that night it felt wrong. Like I was somewhere I wasn't supposed to be. Now I must have dozed off eventually because I woke with a start around 3 a.m. Something had changed. The silence was gone, replaced by a sound so faint I wasn't sure if I was really hearing it or just imagining it. A low, rhythmic humming, like someone running a finger around the rim of a wine glass, but deeper, more resonant. I laid perfectly still, straining my ears. The sound seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once, as if the air itself was vibrating. My first thought was that it must be some kind of industrial noise carrying from far away, a factory or a power plant. But this was different, organic somehow, almost alive. The humming grew louder, or maybe my ears just adjusted to it. It had a pattern to it now, rising and falling in regular intervals, like breathing, like the clearing itself was breathing. I reached for my phone to record the sound, but it was dead. This was impossible. I'd charged it fully before leaving the car, and it had been at 82% when I checked my GPS last. The screen remained stubbornly black, no response when I held down the power button. And then the humming changed pitch, dropping lower, and with it came a pressure in my head, a dull throbbing behind my eyes. The air felt thicker, harder to breathe. I sat up, fumbling for my headlamp. It was dead too. Even my backup flashlight, which I kept in a waterproof case with fresh batteries, it wouldn't turn on. And that's when I noticed this second impossible thing. The trees at the edge of the clearing had moved in closer. Now, I know how that sounds. Trees don't move, they can't move, but I'm telling you, they were closer now. The clearing was smaller, maybe by 10 feet on all sides. I could see it even in the dim moonlight that filtered through the canopy. The perfectly spaced trunks had shifted inwards, maintaining their exact distances from each other, like the walls of a circular room slowly contracting. I tried to tell myself it was just my eyes playing tricks on me. Depth perception gets weird at night, but then I saw one of them move. It wasn't fast. If I hadn't been staring right at it, I wouldn't have noticed. The trunk simply shifted, sliding through the earth like a finger through water. No disturbance, no sound except for that endless humming. An inch forward, then another. The others were moving too, all of them. A synchronous dance in slow motion, drawing the circle tighter. Now I should have run, should have grabbed my pack and bolted out of there, leaving the tent and everything else behind, but I couldn't move. The humming that had worked its way into my bones, into my thoughts, making everything slow and syrupy. My muscles felt like lead, and the pressure in my head had become a vice. The trees were maybe 15 feet from my tent now, close enough that I could see that there was something wrong with their bark. It looked too smooth, too uniform, and it was moving, rippling like the surface of water, patterns flowing and swirling across it in the moonlight. Faces seemed to form and dissolve into the patterns. Twisted, agonized faces that opened their mouths in silent screams. The humming built to a crescendo, and with it came understanding. Horrible, unwanted understanding. This wasn't a clearing. It was a mouth, and I was not the first meal it had caught. Those weren't trees. Those were teeth. Ancient, patient teeth that had been waiting here long before the first humans walked into these woods. The faces in the bark were real, the remnants of other campers, other hikers who had thought this perfect circle of flat ground would make a good place to spend the night. Their essence absorbed, their memories and experiences added to the collective consciousness of the thing that had devoured them. I could feel it trying to get into my mind now, tendrils of alien thought probing at the edges of my consciousness. The humming had become a song, beautiful and terrible, promising peace, promising an end to loneliness, promising to make me part of something vast and eternal. Just relax, it seemed to say. Just let go. Join us. The ground beneath my tent had begun to soften, becoming spongy and wet. A thick, sweet smell filled the air, the smell of digestive enzymes, I realized with detached horror. The same smell that had been so faint when I arrived, masked by the natural decay of fallen leaves. The trees were only feet away now, their bark faces reaching toward me with hungry anticipation. The humming was everything, filling my world, filling my thoughts. I felt myself beginning to fade, my memories becoming thin and watery, and soon there'd be nothing left but the song, the endless song of the clearing that was not a clearing. I'd like to say that I fought it, that I found some hidden reserve of strength and broke free of its influence, but the truth is, I was saved by pure, dumb luck. A deer, probably spooked by a predator, crashed through the underbrush somewhere in the darkness beyond the clearing, the sudden noise shattering the hypnotic effect of the humming just for a moment, but that moment was enough. I moved purely on instinct, bursting out of my tent and running straight between two of the tree teeth. I felt something grab at me, bark hands with too many fingers, but they were slow, and I was running on pure adrenaline. I crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face, roots trying to tangle at my feet, and behind me, the humming changed to a roar of frustration that shook the entire forest.
I ran until my lungs were on fire, until I couldn't run anymore. And then I walked. I walked through the rest of that night and well into the next day, staying on game trails and deer paths, too afraid to stop or even look back. When I finally reached a road, I flagged down the first car I saw and begged a ride to the nearest town. Now, I never went back for my gear. I never went back to my car either. Called a tow company and had them pick it up. I sold it a week later and I bought a new one, too afraid that somehow the thing in the clearing might have marked it, might be able to track me through it. Now, that was 3 years ago. I haven't been camping since, stealth or otherwise, but I think about that clearing every day, about the faces in the bark, and the humming that almost made me one of them. Sometimes late at night when everything is quiet, I think I can hear it again, calling to me from far away, calling me to come back, to take my place in the circle, to become part of its eternal song. Now, I tried to warn others as well. I've posted on hiking forums called the Forest Service. I've even tried to find the clearing on satellite maps to document its location. But the images are always blurry in the area, and the GPS coordinates I saved that night are corrupted, showing impossible numbers. The few times I've worked up the courage to look at hiking forums, I've found other stories, whispering accounts of perfect circular clearings found in unexpected places, of strange humming sounds in trees that seem to move in the darkness. They're spreading, I think, growing new mouths in the wilderness, waiting for unwary campers to stumble across them. So, let me give you some advice. If you're out in the woods and you find a clearing that looks too perfect, that feels just too right, don't stop. Don't make camp. Just keep walking no matter how tired you are, no matter how inviting it looks. And if you hear humming in the night, run. Run as fast and as far as you can, and pray that you're faster than I was. Pray that luck is on your side. Because the trees are hungry, and they're always looking for new faces to add to their collection. I know because sometimes in my dreams, I see my own face forming in that rippling bark, mouth open in a silent scream, still humming that eternal song. And I wake up wondering if I really escaped at all, or if part of me is still there, forever circling in that perfect clearing, waiting for the next wary traveler to make camp in exactly the wrong place. So remember, not all campsites want to hide you. Some want to hide you forever. The Urban Sleeper. The tarp made a sound like whispering when the wind caught it. Not the friendly kind of whispering, the kind that makes you think someone's standing just behind you, waiting. I pulled it tighter across my bivvy bag, trying to secure it between two trees in Hampstead Heath. The sun had set an hour ago, and the London skyline glowed orange beyond the trees, a false dawn that never quite faded. I shouldn't have been there. Nobody should be camping in London's parks after dark. But rent had hit €2,000 a month for a moldy studio in Zone 4. And I'd made my choice. 3 weeks of stealth camping while I saved up for a deposit. That was the plan. The first few nights weren't so bad. I'd found spots in the deeper parts of the heath where dog walkers rarely ventured. The trick was to set up after sunset and gone before the first joggers arrived at dawn. No fires, no trash, no trace. Just me, my sleeping bag, and the urban forest. But something changed on night 4. I first noticed it when I was brushing my teeth, behind a thick cluster of rhododendrons. A crack of a branch. Too heavy for a fox, too deliberate for the wind. I froze, toothpaste foaming at my lips, and I listened. Nothing. And then another crack, but closer this time, followed by the unmistakable sound of leaves crunching underfoot. "Hello?" I whispered, immediately regretting making any noise at all. The sound stopped. I picked up and moved spots that night, heading deeper into the heath, but the feeling of being watched had settled into my bones like damp moss. The next day at work, I couldn't focus. I kept thinking about my camp, hidden but vulnerable in the daylight. What if someone found it? What if they were waiting there now? The security camera in the corner of the office seemed to follow me. When my colleague Dave asked why I looked so tired, I mumbled something about insomnia, and I avoided his eyes. He wouldn't understand. Nobody would understand. And that evening, I chose a new spot near the Vale of Health. It was risky, closer to the paths than I'd like, but something about the previous location felt wrong, tainted. As I set up my shelter in the growing darkness, my hands shook. Every shadow looked like a person. Every rustle sounded like footsteps. I lay in my sleeping bag, scrolling through my phone to distract myself from the noises of the heath that night. The battery was at 15%. I'd have to use the portable charger sparingly. It needed to last until I could charge it at work tomorrow. The screen's blue light made the darkness beyond seem even darker. Then a notification popped up. Met police. Increased patrols in North London parks following recent incidences. My heart rate doubled. What incidents? I opened the article, but my data had run out. The darkness pressed closer. And that's when I heard it. A low humming sound like someone quietly singing to themselves. It was coming from the direction of the path, maybe 30 meters away. I held my breath and listened. The humming got closer and then stopped. A beam of light swept through the trees and I pressed myself flat against the ground, praying my dark green tarp blended with the foliage. The light passed over my hiding spot once, twice, and then 3 times. Each sweep felt like a physical touch, like fingers probing for a weakness. I could hear breathing now, not just my own panicked gasps, but someone else's steady, purposeful breathing. "I know you're out here somewhere," a voice said softly. Not a police officer's authoritative bark or a park ranger's stern warning. This was almost gentle, like someone talking to a scared animal. "I've seen your camps. Different spots, but always the same setup. It's very neat. It's very careful." I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The voice was closer now. "Well, it must be getting lonely out here. Cold, too. I can help you, you know. I help all of them." My phone buzzed loudly against my chest, the 15% battery warning dropping to 10%. The light snapped to my location. "Well, there you are." I burst from my sleeping bag, abandoning everything except my phone and wallet. Branches whipped my face as I ran blindly through the darkness. Behind me, I heard laughter. Not mocking, but delighted. Like a child playing hide and seek. "Running only makes it worse," the voice called after me. "You can ask the others." I didn't stop running until I reached the lit streets of South End Green. My lungs burned and blood trickled from a scratch on my cheek. Late-night pub goers stared as I passed, but I didn't care. I couldn't go back, at least not tonight. I spent what felt like hours walking the bright streets of Camden, jumping at every shadow. When exhaustion finally overcame fear, I found myself at Liverpool Street Station, The 24-hour McDonald's became my refuge until dawn. The harsh fluorescent lights and constant presence of other insomniacs, a comfort I never thought I'd need. Morning came with a sort of hollow relief. In the harsh light of day, last night's terrors seemed almost ridiculous. Almost. But I had to go back. My laptop was still in my backpack at the camp, along with most of my clothes and my work ID. I couldn't afford to lose them. The heath looked different in daylight. Joggers passed with friendly nods, dog walkers chatted on benches, and children played in the distance. I found my spot easily enough, almost too easily. Everything was exactly as I'd left it, but something was wrong. My sleeping bag had been zipped up neatly. The tarp was properly secured, better than I'd managed to do it, and on top of my backpack sat a paper cup of coffee, still warm, with a note tucked underneath. My hands trembled as I read it. "You're doing it wrong. The heath isn't safe anymore. Too many patrols since they found the others. Try Abney Park Cemetery instead. The Victorian graves provide better cover, and the residents don't mind sharing their space. Anyway, I left you a coffee and fixed your tarp setup. You'll need better knots if you want to survive out here. P.S. Your laptop battery was low, so I charged it for you. I'm always happy to help a fellow urban sleeper." The coffee was exactly how I liked it. Oat milk, flat white, no sugar. I called in sick to work and spent the day in a daze, wandering through crowded shopping centers where the constant presence of other people made me feel somewhat safe. But as the afternoon wore on, questions gnawed at my sanity. How did they know I used oat milk? How did they charge my laptop? Where were the others they mentioned, and what happened to them? The note burned in my pocket like a hot coal. That night, I broke down and spent €80 on a hostel in King's Cross. The Japanese tourists in my dorm snored and scrolled through their phones until late, but every sound was human, normal, expected. I should have felt safer. But as I lay in the narrow bottom bunk, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd entered some sort of game. The note writer was still out there, probably watching another stealth camper right now, leaving them coffee and helpful tips like some twisted guardian angel. I checked my laptop the next morning. The battery was indeed fully charged, but when I opened my browser, I found dozens of new tabs open. All searches for different camping spots around London. Abney Park Cemetery, Nunhead Cemetery, Tower Hamlets Cemetery Park. A pattern emerged. All Victorian cemeteries, all supposedly closed that night, all marked with notes like good tree cover and minimal security patrols. They'd been using my laptop while I slept in the heath. Planning, searching, but for what? The last tab was open to a news article from 3 months ago. Missing person case. Urban explorer last seen near Abney Park Cemetery. The accompanying photos showed a young woman with a backpack similar to mine, smiling at the camera. The article mentioned she was known for documenting hidden places in London on her social media. Her last post had been a photo of a Victorian gravestone at dusk, captioned, "Some spaces are best explored alone." I closed the laptop and tried to steady my breathing. The hostel's common rooms suddenly felt too crowded, too warm. Everyone seemed to be watching me. The receptionist, the backpackers eating cereal, the janitor mopping the floor. Any one of them could be the note writer. Any one of them could be following me. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Missing your spot in the heath already? Don't worry. Abney Park is lovely this time of year. The angels watch over you while you sleep. I blocked the number immediately, but another text came through from a different one. You can't afford hostels forever. Cemeteries are calling. We're all waiting for you. That was 2 weeks ago, and I'm writing this from another hostel. My 6th in 14 days. The money I'd saved for rental deposit is almost gone, spent on overpriced dorm beds and convenience store meals. Every night I get texts from new numbers, each one telling me about different cemetery spots, each one promising safety and community. And sometimes I see them now, other people with backpacks and tired eyes hurrying through London's streets at dusk. Are they running to something or away from something? Do they get coffee and notes too? Are they part of whatever this is? Last night I dreamed I was back in the heath. In the dream, I followed the humming voice deeper and deeper into the darkness. It led me to a clearing where dozens of tents and tarps were set up, each one occupied by a silent figure. They all turned to look at me at once, their faces hidden in shadow, and raised paper coffee cups in greeting. I woke up to find my hostel locker open and a new note on top of my backpack. Time's running out. Money's running out. The cemeteries are peaceful this time of year. The Victorian dead don't judge. They understand what it's like to need a place to rest. Join us. We're all urban sleepers here. And the thing is, they're right. I can't afford hostels much longer. The streets aren't safe. The shelters are full. And every day I catch myself looking up those cemeteries on my phone, wondering if the angels really do watch over you while you sleep. Now I've started hearing humming everywhere I go. Coffee shops, on the tube, in the hostel showers. And sometimes I think I see the note writer in crowds, a glimpse of someone looking back at me, smiling, holding a paper coffee cup, but they're always gone when I look again. Now tonight's my last night in the hostel. I still haven't decided where I'll go next, but I keep thinking about those Victorian angels, their stone eyes watching over the quiet graves. I keep thinking about the others out there, the urban sleepers, waiting with their coffee and their knots and their secrets. And maybe they're right. Maybe the cemeteries are safer than the heath. Maybe the dead are better company than the living. Or maybe that's exactly what they want me to think. If you're reading this and you're thinking about stealth camping in London, don't. Get out of the city and go somewhere else. The urban sleepers are watching, and once they notice you, the game never really ends. I have to go now. Someone's humming in the hallway, and I just got a new text. Your coffee's getting cold. Abney Park is lovely at midnight. The worst part is, I'm starting to think they're right about the knots. My tarp setup really could use some work.